Perlovsky, and he's also a veteran of this conference, and I heard him talk several times already. And he has some sort of magic feature. He produces some challenging questions, produces then either a new structure, a model, and so on, and you ask yourself, how is this possible? And today he will probably surprise us again. The topic of his talk is aesthetic emotions and informatics, whatever this means, and the floor is open to you and to your magic.
Okay, thanks. I say a few words about mechanisms of the mind, such as concepts, emotions, and then discuss the difference between specifically aesthetic emotions, which are more related to communications and to informatics. Then I'll discuss the dual hierarchy of cognition and language in our mind, and how language and understanding of the world are related. Then say a few words about beautiful and what are specific emotions related to speech and music. And then, if I have time, just what else could be studied in the future. Concepts. Well, we understand the world in terms of concepts. Concepts are neural representations in our mind, and their function in cognition is to model reality. So we understand what's around us by modeling it, not by models in the computer, but by, of course, first of all, by modeling inside of our mind. For example, perception is a process in which we match concepts or models, modeling the world, to matching predictions of this model inside of our brain, mind, matching it to what we see around us, or more general, what we experience in our life. And but in terms of how our mind came to start doing this kind of things, of course, it's a long process. Maybe the very first mechanism of the mind, in terms of how it evolved, is a mechanism of instincts. Like simple animals, same way our brain, first of all, acts using instincts. And instincts are internal sensors. Like we have sensors inside of our body. For example, we have sensors that measure sugar level in our blood, and many other. We have probably dozens of these sensors that measure vital parameters inside of our body, and if these vital parameters deviate from their standard safe range, then instinctual sensors send information to appropriate decision-making parts of the brain, and we experience these signals and associated states as emotions. Putting it another way, emotions motivate us to make, to conduct behavior, to behave ourselves in a way which can help maintaining our vital needs within the safe range. For example, if we are hungry, we want to eat, and this is what happens if measuring mechanism or sensors measuring sugar level in our blood indicate that it is lower than what's supposed to be, then we experience hunger emotionally, and that means that there was signals sent to the decision-making of our mind, such as the way we understand reality around us, And the mind starts looking, or the mind directs us to looking for what is there to eat around us. Of course, it is a very much simplified way of how the mind acts. But I'd like to concentrate or move from, so to speak, bodily instincts and bodily emotions toward more spiritual aspects of how we function, because well, the difference between us and simple animals is that we are involved in higher cognition and more kind of spiritual way of understanding the world and behaving in it. And so what does it mean, more spiritual or higher cognition? In addition to instincts that measure vital states, vital parameters about states of our body, we have instinct for knowledge, which is the most important instinct for us because such higher organisms as humans, for us to survive, we must understand what's going on around us. So we must to understand. And understanding is so important that we have an inborn mechanism to improve our knowledge and mechanisms of understanding. And so there is a mechanism called instinct for knowledge, which improves, which drives us to improve concept models. As I said, concepts are neural mechanisms in the mind which represent reality, and they not only just represent it as a photograph, but they actually model processes around us. And as with any other instinct, there are emotions corresponding to the knowledge instinct. So they indicate there are emotions indicating to us if our instinct for knowledge is satisfied or is not satisfied. And those emotions are called aesthetic emotions since Kant. Before Kant, people who were trying to do it or only just started to be existing, and this kind of pre-scientific idea about this pre-scientific ideas about aesthetic emotions. Of course, people knew that there are aesthetic emotions since Greek. And by 17th century, there were attempts to understand scientifically what's going on. And at that time, the idea was that aesthetic emotions related to beautiful, to understanding the kind of pleasant things in life, was that aesthetics is a specific mechanism of perception. That in eyes there are certain mechanisms that perceive specific things that are pleasant and beautiful. And Kant was the first one to understand that this is wrong, that we understand beautiful things, and he called it aesthetic emotions, by the fact, or maybe there is a better way to say it, but I will say just the words that come to mind, that aesthetic emotions are related to knowledge, that we understand things as beautiful and pleasant in certain spiritual way by their relating to understanding, to knowledge. For example, if, say, hungry is related to satisfying bodily instincts, then aesthetic emotions relate to satisfying instinct for knowledge. And this is how knowledge is related to our kind of how we feel that it is that we need it. We have specific emotions which are satisfied or not satisfied if our ideas about the world corresponds to the surrounding reality. So if it corresponds to surrounding reality, we feel aesthetically good. And if it is not satisfied, then we feel aesthetically not satisfied. And I would like to connect these ideas, which exist in Kant, to topic of this conference, to how communicate to other people, and actually, first of all, to your own mind, that communications of knowledge requires emotion. You cannot just present, so to speak, facts expressed in a completely cold way, hoping that people would understand what you're talking about. There should be some elements of emotions in order for communication to occur. And informatics, for which communication is an important part, should use those emotions related to knowledge, which are aesthetic emotions. So this is a connection that I would like to emphasize. And here's, well, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that, of course, in our mind, there are multiple layers of knowledge. At the bottom, so to speak, there are just sensory experience and just simple acts. Higher up, there are ideas of objects, ideas of situations, abstract ideas, and the question is, what is on the top of this hierarchy? In this hierarchy of our mind, what is on the top? But first, let me say a few words about interaction between various levels. At every level, there are some ideas, and they interact with ideas below, while ideas below send signals and interact with higher level ideas. And an important thing to understand what's going on in the hierarchy of mind is that concepts at every level tries to unify, or that's how they evolve in evolution, that concepts unify lower level concepts, and this is how higher level concepts emerge. And so if you look at any higher level or more abstract level concept, it is important to realize that every higher level concept must be more vague and less conscious than lower level concept, because otherwise how can you combine in a single notion ideas about many other things that are understood and exist at the lower level? And so this is just the structure of the hierarchy. The higher you go, or the higher structure of our mind goes, the more abstract and general our ideas, and the less specifically they are understood. And it turns out, I'll say a few more words about it later, that we understand abstract ideas mostly due to language. And this is why, for example, animals, they don't have language and don't have abstract ideas. And our abstract ideas that are kind of higher up are developed with the help of language. I'll say a few words about it later. First, I'd like to address what is at the very top of this hierarchy, in which way the top ideas are different than ideas lower. The ideas at the top of the hierarchy, and I said, of course, they are not very conscious. We cannot understand them as specifically as we understand simple objects. For example, this is a chair. You can't understand the highest ideas in your mind with the same clarity. But so what is at the top? First of all, we know from what we already discussed that what is at the top will attempt to unify all your experience. And indeed, there are representations. And right now, there are experiments. I'm very happy that after saying these things for many years, finally, I found a colleague who would like to prove that experimentally that this is a fact. That representations at the very top of the mind attempt to unify your entire life experience. And we perceive them, and the meaning and purpose of life. And of course, there are emotions that go with these representations, because the knowledge instinct, if you understand what is at the top, even you cannot understand it as clearly as you understand a chair, but we attempt to understand it, we understand it in certain ways. And emotions corresponding to this understanding are emotions of the beautiful. And I'm very much thankful to Kant, because I think I learned it from Kant. And some of my friends told me, Leonid, you just put equations around what Kant have already said. That's fine, I'll agree with that. I think I get all of these ideas from Kant, but some people say, no, Kant didn't say anything like this. It's all your invention. Fine, I'll agree with that one as well. But we cannot understand, without language, as I mentioned, we will not be able to understand this entire hierarchy. The reason is that abstract and general concepts don't exist in the world around us ready for cognition. And like, for example, the fact that I look at this room and I understand what is that there is some sort of a lecture hall, and how I understand it. There are people sitting, looking at the screen, and there's a guy waving hands and explaining something. So, but these ideas don't exist in the world by itself. Like my cat, if he, very smart guy, if he walks into this room, he will not understand that it is a lecture hall. Why? Because we understand it due to language. The reason between understanding the world and understanding language is fundamental. Language evolved over at least tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of years and accumulates cultural ideas about what is important in the world. So there is, like in red, there is how we understand in language what is around us. There is entire hierarchy in language describing our experience in terms of language, but not necessarily in terms of how the world works. And language, because we talk to other people, or beginning from childhood age, a child hears in language how people put their experience in language. And then beginning from childhood, everyone looks around and try to organize one's experience according to what he or she hear in language. So let me repeat again, what is the fundamental difference between language and cognition? Language learns what already is known in the culture without necessarily having experience about life. And that's why kids at the age of 4 or 5 already can talk about a lot of different things. And based on this cultural knowledge, we develop what is on the left side, the cognitive appreciation and understanding of the world. And that's why language and cognition both are necessary for this kind of development. And of course, if you communicate something to other people, you have to appreciate the fact that it is necessary, on one hand, to put it in language, on another hand, to make sure it is put in language in such a way that it is connected to your experience and experience of other people in the world. So this connection between the world, cognition, language, and culture, what exists in the culture, works all together in order to understand the world. And do I still have time? Okay. So I'll say that attempts to explain how this mechanism works for many years, for hundreds of years, used logic, trying to logically express this kind of understanding and experiences, but it turned out that logic cannot really do this. And we have, well, all of us have great confusion about logic for several reasons. One, it is a very old way of expressing oneself and communicating, and we think that, that logic is the most efficient and effective way to communicate things, which is true. But if we return 2,300 years ago to a time when Aristotle invented logic, and look at what Aristotle said about it, it is interesting that Aristotle said that logic is only needed to communicate to other people what already is perfectly understood. But he warned his students, don't use logic to explain how the mind works. And he explained that the mind works by relating vague ideas in the mind, not logical, but the vague ideas in the mind, relating them to experience. And during this relationship, they become logical. So only when you understand something, it is logical. And this is, of course, closely related to the fact that when people really were trying in the 20th century to understand mind logically, well, there was a guy named Gödel who proved that it is impossible, that logic is self-contradictory and cannot be really the fundamental explanatory power. And dynamic logic is an idea to put Aristotelian ways of understanding the world in a scientific, mathematical way. And it works exactly as I said. It starts with vague ideas, so there are vague ideas in your memory, in your mind, and matching them to the world is really the fundamental process of the mind. So this just summarizes what I just said, that Aristotle was saying that, he said, Plato is wrong by assuming that ideas exist before knowledge. What we have in our mind, brain, are vague, illogical concepts as potentialities. When they meet matter, that's how he put it. Of course, today we say during perception. When our concept as potentiality meets matter, they become specific, logical ideas. For example, I have a general idea, vague and fuzzy idea about chair as such. And when I look at a specific chair, my vague ideas turn into this specific idea of this specific chair. And this is how the mind works. And well, this is kind of the fundamentals of mind operations. I'd like to say about, I like this thing, it sounds like an anecdote, but it is really true. There was letters between Aristotle and Alexander the Great. Of course, Aristotle was teacher of Alexander. And once Alexander, being somewhere in Persia, wrote a letter to Aristotle. Aristotle, I heard you are writing books now. Are you going to make our secret knowledge available to everybody? Well, what can you expect between a general and professor? Of course, general is concerned with security. And of course, professor wants to publish books. But what's most interesting I found in this correspondence, what Aristotle wrote back to him. He wrote to him, Alexander, don't worry, nobody will understand. And well, it's true, I think I understood something new about what Aristotle said more than 2,000 years ago, and well, he was really a great guy. He appreciated that people are not ready to understand some new ideas. This is just an example of what Aristotle says, how the mind works, and how I'm saying dynamic logic operates. And this is an example. On A, there are shown several patterns that are in the data. I know about it because it is all simulated. And B shows how really an image looks like. Somewhere inside this, under this noise, there are those kind of smiles and frowns, but you cannot see them because there's too much noise. Nevertheless, dynamic logic can find it. The first idea is vague. Second is less vague, and when it goes, the algorithm goes to third iteration at the bottom in D. It decides, well, maybe there are three of something. Vague, still not clear, but then after a few more iterations, the algorithm gets towards those smiles and frowns that actually are there, even though algorithm knows nothing about it. And this is how we understand the world. When you look, let me make a step back. It is important and fundamental for understanding of how our mind works to appreciate that C, D, E, F, G are inaccessible, these vague states are inaccessible to consciousness. They take pretty long, it's about half a second. Only when the ideas get to H, when it is pretty crisp, and we understand what is in the world, and so this is this is a part of the working of the mind is that only the final state, the crisp state, is accessible to consciousness. But what is in between, we are not conscious about it. And this is one of the reasons that people think that logic is so important, because we are only conscious about logical states. But what is in the middle, we don't know. We don't know consciously, we know scientifically, but our subjective consciousness is not aware about it. Yeah, by the way, do I still have time?
5 minutes.
Oh, okay, 5 minutes is fine. I can finish in 5 minutes. This is just another example, but essentially the same thing. I just wouldn't spend time. This is still another example. In this case, there are three sensors. If you look at the very first image, you see that actually there are 4 objects, but 2 of them are kind of on top of each other. So you cannot understand. It is impossible to see. Sensor doesn't differentiate between them. However, by having 3 sensors looking from several sides, the system can figure out that there are 4. As you look at the last one, the system sees that there are actually four objects. And this is because it combines. And that's how we see what's going on in the world. I wouldn't spend too much time. I'll just say that this is just another example. That when you look at a situation, or when you look around, you see a lot of different things. Which of these are situations that make sense, that we need to understand, and which of them are just random collection of objects. For example, if I look in this direction, I see several objects. Are they important for me to understand what's going on? And there have been no algorithms that could sort out everything we see and decide which of those make sense and which of them are not. And here the algorithm does exactly this. It looks, if you take these random views, they look exactly like that. They look random. But if you look on the right, you see that some ideas are, it just sorted. Views which are certain similarities and views that are not. And when you look at those kind of things, you see that there are certain objects that repeat from one situation to another, indicating that maybe these are the real situations. Whereas, of course, in many cases, there is nothing that repeats, so maybe this is just random collections of objects. This is just mathematical ideas. So it is important that it is possible, in principle, to solve this kind of problems. This is the same algorithm actually doing something useful. It is looking at packets on the network and decide that certain packets have certain similarity between them, and it turned out that those are packets containing viruses. So in this case, there was several hundred thousand of packets in the network, and system was able to sort them out. First, it looked at large number of packets which has nothing wrong with them. It learns what's good, and then it was able to sort out all packets that that contained viruses. And it's amazing that it works that well. Among 120,000 packets, it did not miss a single virus and never had any single false alarm. So that's good. Maybe we will be able to make in future something more useful, practically useful of these things. But the amazing thing is also that it is how fast the system learns. Actually, within about 3 iterations, the system already knew what kind of situation, you can say situations, or type of packets existed in these networks. So it learned pretty fast. So it could be used for cybersecurity purposes. And my time probably comes to, so I will just say what kind of problems we were able to look at and get some useful results. Let me see. Yep. Oh, no, it's good enough. I have to stop. Those are kind of problems that we addressed. And there are many more problems that probably could be addressed using this idea. So our mind, I will finish with just by saying our mind still probably is the most powerful algorithm or device using algorithms that we have, and learning from the mind probably is still useful for many years to come. Thank you.